Thank you for listening to my daddy's podcast. Please subscribe to our channel.
Hey, don't let these tears fool you. There's all dog around this mug. I'm good.
Hey, what's going on, Who Dat Nation? It is yours truly, Timothy J. Jones. And yes, I am the host of the State of the Saints podcast. Thank you so much for checking out the State of the Saints podcast, where we talk New Orleans Saints. And on this edition, we have a special guest with us here on the State of the Saints podcast. And if you follow the team, you definitely know who he is. He's from Locked On Saints, LouisianaSports.net. And just keeping you up to date on all things New Orleans Saints, a good friend of mine, Mr. Ross Jackson. Ross, how you doing, man?
What's good, brother? I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for having me on. I wouldn't call me a special guest, just a guest, really, right. But I appreciate you.
Well, look, I mean, you do so much of when it comes to the team, and we appreciate everything that you do, man. I call you the hardest working man in the business for a reason, man. And I appreciate you, thank you for all that you do. And thank you for stopping by just to talk a little bit of Saints football with us, man. It's been kind of crazy, man. If you think about some of the off seasons and years past, Ross, compared to how it is now, you know, it's pretty hectic. I mean, even right now, upon the making of this, I mean, Doug Nussmeier becomes the offensive coordinator of the New Orleans Saints. Kellen Moore is trying to put together his staff. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, it's not so much of a surprise, but what are your thoughts on Doug Nussmeier becoming the OC?
Yeah, for basically about as long as Kellen Moore has been the guy that was going to be the head coach, Doug Nussmeier has been the guy that was going to be the offensive coordinator. So you're right. It's not much of a surprise, but I'll tell you, it is the perfect hire for Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore, 36 years old, a more experienced 36-year-old than typical youngest coaches in the NFL are. Don't get me wrong. But to have the other guy next to you that's been there with you in Dallas, that was there next to you in LA, then went with you over to Philly, like the connectivity. You know, I know I talked about on my show today, the idea that like we have treated, and rightfully so, over the course of the past, recent past, words like continuity, cohesion, and familiarity as dirty words. And rightfully so, because they have not worked out. But this is one of those cases where continuity, cohesion, chemistry, like whatever, it makes sense because you want that guy that's going to be able to translate what it is that Kellen Moore wants to the offense. And a guy like Nussmeier, there's no translation needed. There's no new language needed, nothing like that. Like he knows what it is that Kellen Moore wants. He's a quarterback guy. Your three top coaches when it comes to the offense are all former quarterbacks now, with the quarterback coach, Scott Tolzien, included in that combination. I think that's important for this team that's probably going to be developing a quarterback in the coming years, whether in the background or as a starter. TJ, we'll figure out what it is. But I think he's the right hire for what Kellen Moore needs and will want to do over the course of the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the continuity. I mean, you think about even when Clint Kubiak, I mean, he goes to Seattle and he brings Andrew Janoko with him. So
brought everybody with him.
Yeah. So, I mean, Doug Nussmeier, like, he's been with Kellen Moore, like you mentioned. So you want to get somebody that's and I just think that it helps the process. You don't have to worry about a person's personality. You kind of understand where that person is coming from and vice versa. In that regard. So looking forward to seeing what Doug Nussmeier can bring to the table as an offensive coordinator. But my last question to you about Nussmeier is, are we going to see one of those situations kind of similar to Dennis Allen, where he was the one calling the plays defensively and you had Joe Woods, mostly kind of just playing the background, maybe being a little bit of that guy that you can kind of feed information and ideas off of? Do you see the same type of dynamic going on between Moore and Nussmeier?
That's such a good question. It's like you read my show sheet before I jumped on. That's incredible. So yes and no. And for all the good reasons. Yes, in that Kellen Moore will call the offense much like Dennis Allen called the defense. So it still will be Kellen Moore's architected and executed offense that
Right.
Doug Nussmeier helps to install, helps to execute all those other things. The no is like we would talk to Joe Woods on Thursdays. We get coordinators on Thursdays, and we would ask Joe Woods like, certain questions about the defense and stuff like that. And one time he said, I just kind of worry about my position group. And it was like, hold up, but wait, but you're the defensive coordinator. And so what it was is that like, Joe Woods is an experienced defensive coordinator, but I just don't think he was given the reins to really be the guy that was helping with the installs and helping with translating the defense, stuff like that. Like it felt very much like Dennis Allen had everything in his hands. That's probably why the defense started to slip over the course of the last couple of years, if we're being honest, because he was too much, right? Like a lack of delegation oftentimes leads to a lack of production. And you see that in, I don't care if you're coaching football or if you're, if you're a line cook at or you're the head chef at a restaurant. Like if you're not delegating, you're not getting anything done. And so I think there was an element of that you won't see when it comes to this Kellen Moore, Doug Nussmeier. I think Nussmeier will be a little bit more involved. He won't be somebody that is like a dual position coach and offensive coordinator. His role is going to be to help translate, install, and probably also help to kind of impact a little bit of what the game plan is going, because he has so much experience next to Kellen Moore in terms of what he wants to do. I don't see why you don't give him his voice in that situation as well.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to see how this thing is going to work. Like I said, I think that they have that chemistry together. So I think that he's going to, delegate some, some work towards his way. I think it's going to be best, especially for a guy in Moore that's going into a new field, which is being a head coach. So you definitely want to make sure that you can count on the guys that you hire. But speaking of Kellen Moore, I mean, it's been about a week now since he has been named the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. Ross, between, meeting him at the Super Bowl, during that Super Bowl week, and just overall, I know it's pretty early, to really understand Kellen Moore overall. But what kind of feelings and thoughts do you have about him and what you have seen so far about his personality and what you feel like he can bring to the New Orleans Saints, maybe something that they haven't had in a while?
Yeah, I appreciate you using the word meeting Kellen Moore. It's often been described what I did all throughout Super Bowl week as stalking Kellen Moore, so I appreciate that. I was literally everywhere the dude was as much as I could be. I think like it was a lot of confirming stuff, if I'm being honest, CJ, more than it was necessarily learning anything new. I think that what you learn new is just kind of his charisma, right? Like you sit across from him and all of a sudden you feel that like, oh yeah, he's pretty comfortable in this environment. Like the 2 or 3, 7 different times that I talked to him at the at the Super Bowl, were very different than your typical stand up at the podium and give an introductory press conference type of moments, right? At the opening night, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on the Superdome field behind you, events and, other scrums and players and all this stuff. And he's sitting behind this like little partition on like a little stool. And there's some Philly media, but then a bunch of New Orleans people around like, hey, buddy, like, are you, and so it's like very much he's being like, accosted by all of us that don't even cover him. You know what I mean? But know that we probably very well soon do so. And then during the media availability throughout the week, it's a table and it's just like a round table. And again, it's a couple of Philly guys that drop in and out. And then it's like 3 or 4 of us in New Orleans media, like, hey, how's it going? You know what I mean? Sitting across from him. And so it's like very different environments than just your typical stand-up at a podium. And I think in each one of those environments, in addition to his stand-up at the podium introductory press conference, which again was very different than the usual weekly thing because it was in the auditorium. There was a lot more media there, more cameras there. Gail and Mickey and, Kai, everybody's there too. His wife's there, his kids are there. Like it's a whole different thing. And in every single one of those environments, he just seemed comfortable and prepared. And I think those are 2 things that I would put out there. I think there's a charismatic piece to that that I think is really important that you don't really get when you listen to him doing like coordinator Thursdays or, watching him on the sideline and stuff like that. So I think there's that part. During the Super Bowl, watching him yell at the referee was a great piece for me because it was like, okay, I want to know, like, does he have that? Like, does he have that fire to where, like, if you're a head coach and you start going at a referee like that, players get behind you. Like, that makes them want to play harder. I'm sure you've experienced that yourself. And so I think that, like, those types of things are probably the new things that I learned. I still have my questions about who he is as a leader and how he commands a room and all those other things. But I think that those things are kind of the little ingredients that maybe make up the big recipe in terms of leadership. And so I think we got to see a little bit of a glimpse of that. But I'll be really interested to hear from the players throughout the season kind of how he manages that role or how he finds his bad cop to his good cop, like where that comes from.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see as he starts to put together his coaching staff, but that has been a question, Ross. If you hear a lot of prognosticators talk about Kellen Moore, they talk about his personality or they feel like lack thereof when it comes to his energy and what he brings. I think it has a lot to do with maybe, the baby face, how young
Sure.
he is,
Yeah.
even at the press conference, what blew me away was here's a guy who's 36 years old. This isn't like normal territory for a guy to get a head coaching opportunity at this stage of his life. Right. And I mean, he's standing up there with the black blazer, with the khaki pants on, like nothing flashy or anything like that. And it's just like he just loves football. He loves to coach football. So yeah, I think that kind of won me over in that regard. I don't think you have to be a rah-rah guy personally. I think that you look at coaches like Kevin O'Connell, even in years past, like Tony Dungy and Lovie Smith. I mean, they found success not having to knock over a Gatorade or slam down headsets, I mean, so I don't think that determines if you're going to be a great coach or not. But I do, want to see, maybe during some adverse times or something like that, how is he going to be able to respond? I think guys are going to get on board. I think it helps that he did play football. Guys tend to respond when they see, individuals like themselves. So, like I said, only time would tell, but I like what I've saw so far. You still got a couple more vacancies he has to fill. The defensive side of football, a lot of reports are saying Brandon Staley. What are your thoughts on that being a possibility? Do you see other candidates that he has interviewed that could be in line if he doesn't go with Staley?
Yeah, look, I think Staley is a Dennis Allen, a Matt Eberflus, like these guys that are better coordinators than they are head coaches. I mean, you look at some of the things that didn't work for Brandon Staley during his time at Los Angeles. A lot of it was game situation management, right? Like he was terrible at game management and stuff. And that cost them over and over again in in-game situations and all these other things. And so you ain't hiring him to do that. You're hiring him to run the defense in this situation. And so I think that in that case, I think he has an opportunity to show, hey, what I did in LA with, Defensive Player of the Year, Aaron Donald, and All-Pro year from Jalen Ramsey and a 10.5 sack season from Leonard Floyd is just as much about me as it is about them. And so I think that there's an opportunity for him to do that. The guy that I think is also really intriguing, honestly, is Christian Parker. I honestly think Christian Parker is just as good a candidate at defensive coordinator. The dude has been all over the place. He has the Fangio connection, which I think is important for Kellen Moore. You look at him and Staley both have that. Durante Jones doesn't have that, but Durante Jones has the same secondary, like defensive backs experience that both Staley and Christian Parker has. There's not the continuity factor, but there are with Parker and with Staley. And so I think that like there's these like little pieces to all that you can discuss, but I like the Fangio tree approach. I like the 3-4 approach, even if you don't do that right away in 2025, but if you begin if you get into the beginnings of that transition, playing more multiple fronts outside of just third down, which is what we saw Dennis Allen do and stuff like that. That's where I think we can see, a good, bit of development, a good bit of progress quickly when it comes to this defense with either Staley or Christian Parker. So I would put both of those guys up there. I do think that Staley gets a worse rap than he deserves because of his head coaching time. I completely understand that though, because he was still in charge of the defense during that time. But as you know, being a head coach in charge of a unit, it's left brain, right brain. Like it's really, really tough. And it's particularly tough for defensive coaches for whatever reason, right? Offensive coaches tend to be more successful with it. Defensive coaches, not so much. And so we'll see. But I think that Brandon Staley is still a good candidate. And he would be another guy that's young, that's innovative, that has experience, just like Kellen Moore is over on the defensive version of that, which I think could be a good route to go, even if it's just for a year. And then you make a decision, to change at a later time if you need to.
Yeah. I think Brandon Staley has to be the top candidate. If you look at, Brandon Staley, when he became the head coach, he brought Kellen Moore to Los Angeles with him. So this could be, where the roles are reversed. So, I like Brandon Staley. I thought that he did a really good job with the Rams when he was the coordinator. They were one of the top ranked defenses in the league. And like you said, some guys are better coordinators than head coaches. When you tell them to focus on that particular thing, they're able to knock it out of the park. We're talking about Dennis Allen. Him being the defensive coordinator of the Bears, I expect for the Bears to have one of the best defenses in the league because he was really good at coaching the defensive side of the football. But on top of some coaching decisions, they have to make some player decisions as well. And, of course, they have to get into compliance. This is a place where the Saints normally live every single offseason, but they always manage to find a way. But, Ross, it seems a little different this year because it might mean saying goodbye to some familiar names and some mainstays with the New Orleans Saints. But what are your thoughts about these tough decisions? You think about some of the players north of 30. Some really tough decisions are going to have to be made when it comes to the quarterback position. We'll start with Derek Carr. What are your thoughts on that? I know, Kellen Moore during a press conference was kind of, in the middle. Like he didn't say that he was going to get rid of him, but he didn't say that he was committed to him either. And also you're hearing reports about how a lot of organizations, as well as the Saints, are high on Spencer Rattler. So what are your thoughts on the quarterback situation in New Orleans?
Yeah, it's all going to come down to, where Kellen Moore wants to go. I think that's the most important thing. I think the organization needs to be willing to do what it is that Kellen Moore wants at the position. It can't be, we have this amount of money invested in him. You can't use that anymore when Russell Wilson's getting cut with, a ton of dead money and tens of thousands of dollars of dead money. And Aaron Rodgers is walking away with tens of thousands of dollars of dead money. Like there's just no precedent for that anymore. When teams want to move on at quarterback, they simply move on at quarterback. And so if that's what Kellen Moore wants to do, the most important thing is that whatever it is that he wants is what the organization should do. So I'll start there. When it comes down to it, my personal opinion is that a split makes sense for both sides. I think the Saints are in the midst of a rebuild. I don't look at them as a 2025 playoff team. If they get there, awesome, super exciting, really great. Wow, they beat the odds. That's super cool. But let's be real, right? They got brand new head coach, brand new everything, all new everything. And typically all new everything does not end up getting you into the postseason. And I know folks like to point out, well, look at what the Washington Commanders did. Look at what the Los Angeles Chargers did. There's a reason why you can count those teams on one hand, right? Because they're the exception. They're not the norm. Right. And so I think you want to give this time. And I think that if you're going to give this time, that's a way to do it, is to have that split at quarterback. Let Derek Carr go somewhere where he might be able to compete. Let Derek Carr go somewhere else where he might be able to do more than what is the expectation here in New Orleans. And then the other side of it too, which has nothing to do with Derek Carr, I think Kellen Moore should be focusing his time on what he wants to develop in 2025. Right. And so when you have the opportunity to roll with a guy like Spencer Rattler or draft a guy like Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe or whatever, right? Whoever the alternative is that fits what it is that he wants to do and his vision over on the offensive side of the football, especially with that offensive coaching staff being built out that shows you that they want to run the football. Yeah. Go with the young guy, develop the young guy, get an opportunity to see what your future looks like, not just what you have in your present, which is what Derek Carr represents. And then if you want to go back to the draft in 2026, you go back to the draft 2026, whatever, it's okay. You have time here. And so I think that it makes sense. Is it necessary? No, the Saints could absolutely keep Derek Carr, restructure him, use that money to bring in more talent, go and draft the next guy or continue to develop Spencer Rattler in the background. They could absolutely do that in 2025. Folks won't like it, but they could do it. And it makes just as much sense. But for me, just looking at where this team is, where Derek Carr is at this point in his career, which is effectively the twilight of his career, let him go somewhere where he has the opportunity to compete while you focus on what your future looks like.
Yeah. My final question for you is, will the New Orleans Saints have both Demario Davis and Cam Jordan on the same team at the beginning of 2025? Do you see that?
Okay, so here the answer is yes. I do think that they'll both be on the team. My expectation, like it's speculation, right? I'm guessing because we don't even know who the defensive coordinator is at the time that we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
So it completely depends on what they want, really.
Right.
But if I had to guess, because of what we just talked about with you kind of going through what is effectively a transitionary period, having those guys that are your cultural leaders in the locker room is important for that kind of a thing. So I think that they are back in 2025. I don't think, and this could go for one or both of them, but in any case, I don't think that their money is. So what I mean by that is that they're probably back in 2025, but I think there will have to be adjustments to one or both contracts in order for that to happen. That's what I would expect. You can move the money without moving them, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, well, I'm pretty sure a lot of Saints fans are excited about that, especially like if the team is going through a transition. You definitely want those leaders to help that locker room to be able to buy in. So it should be an exciting all season. You got the combine next week, the NFL draft. Looking forward to all of your commentary, Ross. And thank you so much for stopping by here on the State of the Saints podcast. Just let everybody know how they can get in touch with you and also Locked On Saints.
Yeah, man. No, I appreciate that very much. I don't usually do like the self-sell. So if people want to find me, you can come and find me. For me, it's like if you're here, stay locked in with TJ and everything and checking out all the great work that he does. I'm here to represent you, man. I'm not here to represent myself. But I appreciate you so much for having me on. And, it's always a pleasure to be able to chop it up with you and to be able to kick it with you.
Man, likewise. Thank you so much, Ross, for your time. I really do appreciate it. And like I said, looking forward to all of your commentary, LouisianaSports.net, as well as Locked On Saints, the Daily Saints podcast that everybody should be subscribed to. And if you're not, please do so. All right.
So you're just gonna do it. All right. I feel you. I appreciate the respect. All right, but thank you, man. Appreciate it. Absolutely, brother.